Well, on a day when marine protection is top of mind with the new LNG terminal in BC, some worrying findings from Canada's Commissioner of the Environment. In her latest audit, she found the federal government did not take action to protect endangered whale species along Canada's coastlines until they started dying. Now the open question is whether the action the government is taking now is too little too late. The Environment Commissioner also raises concerns about how the federal government's managing the disposal of toxic substances. Canada's Environment Commissioner, Julie Gelfand, is with me now. It's good to see you again. Thanks for coming in to speak with me. Let's start. We've had this big announcement today, and we'll come back to it, of an LNG terminal. The government is trying to get the Trans Mountain Pipeline built, and there's lots of concerns about marine mammal protection in that conversation. We're going to get to that in a minute, but let me start with your findings about how the federal government has failed to protect those endangered marine mammals. What were you looking at, and what did you find?
Okay, so we looked at how the federal government was managing to protect all of our marine mammals, not just the endangered ones. We have 40 marine mammal species, dolphins, seals, whales in Canada, 14 of which are found on the endangered species list. So we looked at all the different tools that the federal government has to protect those animals from two major threats: shipping and commercial fishing. So we didn't look at climate change, we didn't look at other risks, we looked at those two specific ones: commercial fishing and marine navigation.
And what did you find?
What did we find? We found that essentially the government really didn't take much action to protect really any of our marine mammals until 12 North American right whales were found dead in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in 2017. And at that point, the federal government started to act. They started to close some fisheries, they started to reduce the speeds of certain ships in that area and in a few other areas. So they essentially started to do some actions for 3 whale species, and that's really all they've done to date.
The Transport Minister said today, I don't know if you heard, the Transport Minister said today, look, here's what happened with the right whales in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. There had been a relatively small population. Suddenly we found whale migration patterns. Suddenly by the hundreds, right whales start showing up in the Gulf. So we weren't ready, essentially, for that kind of traffic. So he's basically saying it's a whale migration problem. That's why they were late responding. The numbers were big. You buy that?
Well, unfortunately, they have a whole bunch of tools that they could have used and that they could use, still could use, to protect all our marine mammals. So they have the endangered species list and all the actions that you have to do once a species is named endangered. They have marine protected areas that they could use to protect some of these species. They have issues related to bycatch, a policy on bycatch, which they haven't used. They've got the shipping speeds that they could use. They have fishing licenses where they could put some restrictions on those fishing licenses. So they have a whole suite of tools that really had not been used very much at all prior to those 12 for any of the marine mammal species. So it's almost like 12 died, and then all of a sudden, oh, what are we going to do? Here's some tools that we can use. And they decided to use them only for 3 whale species. There are 40 marine mammals in Canada.
So, okay, I mean, pardon the pun here, but what are you saying here, that they missed the boat on this issue? Or are you saying that it's willful neglect, that it was there before their very eyes and they just didn't move on it?
Many of these endangered, there are 14 species that are endangered. Many of them have been on the endangered species list for over a decade, for over 10 years. And we didn't see any action. They couldn't show us any action for 11 out of 14 species at risk, many of whom have been on the species at risk list for over a decade.
Right, and I guess in response to the minister's point that we were caught off guard by a sudden migration of right whales, I suppose if they had been paying closer attention all the way along, perhaps they would have seen that influx of right whales coming, because they would already have a plan in place to protect them.
It's possible that the influx caught them a little bit off guard. What I'm saying is that there's a bigger issue here. There are 40 species of marine mammals, and we didn't see them using them to protect any marine mammal species. Very little activity was being done until those whales were found dead, and then all of a sudden they kick into gear.
So can you say now whether the action the government has now said it's taking, is that going to be enough to protect these animals at risk?
So they have implemented some changes for 3 species of whales. It's too soon for us to be able, we did not audit those because those things happened at the tail end of our audit or even after our audit. So it's possible that they're going to work, and we've heard media that media reports that say 0 whales were killed this year of that species. So, but we did not audit that because it's too soon. From the introduction of the measure to now, it's too soon for us to tell.
Okay. Let me ask you, your report in this aspect comes as the government, as I mentioned, got an LNG terminal moving ahead today in British Columbia, northern BC. The government's before the courts trying to put together a plan that gets the Trans Mountain pipeline built, promising that they're doing what they need to do to protect marine mammals. How should your findings today influence that conversation?
Well, what I would say is that as particularly on the West Coast, there is a population of southern resident killer whales that is sitting at about 74 individuals. You might have heard in the press how one of them died and the mom carried it for 15 days and then another one died recently. This species has been on the species at risk list for many years, over a decade. They were late in developing the recovery plan, late in implementing anything, in developing the action plan, and they have just started to implement some measures to close the salmon fishery, for example. It's quite clear in the recovery plan and the action plan that shipping is a risk to those whales. So anything that increases shipping needs to be mitigated because that species in particular is at risk, and one of the risks is shipping.
You also examined how the government is controlling the risk of toxic substances. What's happening there?
Okay, so there in the issue of toxic substances, what we found, we looked at enforcement of toxic substances, and we also looked at to see whether or not they were achieving their overall objectives. Okay, there are 4,300 substances in Canada that are being reviewed. They've reviewed 3,331. Pretty good.
Not bad.
Not bad. They've determined that 138 are what's called CPAC toxic. They are toxic. Once a chemical is deemed toxic, you develop an action plan with an objective. Get rid of it. Don't produce it anymore. Right. Don't import it anymore. And you produce this objective, and then you have a few measures, control measures, pollution prevention plans, regulations, okay? What we found was they are doing all this activity. They don't actually know if they're achieving the result of reducing it, eliminating it, that kind of thing. So they've got actions, but they don't know if they're achieving their overall objectives.
I guess I'm just listening to it and saying, how can that be? So if you set out a plan to say, what are we doing about this toxic substance? Isn't there somebody get back to me in 3 months and let me know what we did and where we're at? You
would think. So they've started 4 evaluations out of the 138 toxic substances. This was a recommendation we made years ago, and they've only gotten to 4, and they haven't even completed those 4. So another recommendation we made was get on it. We need to know if all the actions that you're taking are actually achieving the results.
Is the safety of Canadians at risk?
Listen, toxic chemicals are risky. And you and I are exposed to them every day. You're sitting in front of your computer. You might go to the dry cleaner. We have toxic substances around us, and the goal that the government has is to reduce the risk. So they're always a risk to us, but our audit didn't show that there was something brand new, different. There's a method of control for each one of these toxic substances, and we did actually indicate that they need to give us more information so that we can prevent. I mean, I didn't realize that by using my computer that there might be some toxic substances in my computer and potentially leaching out. Like as a consumer, we need more information to make sure that we're doing our part as well to stay away from those toxic substances.
Julie Gelfand, always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you very much.